Hello and welcome to Is Solopreneurship the Right Path for Me? I'm Liz Stebley. I'm one of the three solopreneurs who founded Pika about 5 years ago, seems like longer. And the reason that we started Pika is because we realized there was no single place to go to get help, to decide whether or not you wanted to be self-employed or to get the advice that you needed. Actually, the bigger part of the story is let me introduce myself and I will explain. I've been in consulting pretty much my whole postgraduate career. I started with the big firm PwC back in the mid 90s. But once my daughter was born, that big firm model just wasn't going to work for me anymore. So a couple of twists and turns, I literally fell into independent consulting in 2004 when I got laid off from a job at Levi Strauss. And I called a former PwC client and I said, "Hey, I just got laid off. Do you need any help?" He says, "Are you kidding? How soon can you get here?" So I literally had my first project before I even had a laptop. So that was in 2004. My daughter was 3 years old. And that first year, I made more money, lowered my effective tax rate, didn't have to deal with the big firm BS, and had more quality time with my kids. And I thought, this is great. Everybody should be doing this. But of course, it's not that easy. My goal in the next hour is to talk you out of solopreneurship, which is a little counterintuitive, but the reason is because it's hard. It's really hard. And I want you to go in with your eyes open. So if I don't talk you out of it, you'll at least know what you're getting into. So that's my plan for the next 45 minutes. Uh, so in a quick nutshell, Peak is an educational organization and community. So we offer webinars, office hours, coaching, uh, tools, templates, from partner discounts, things like that. But the most important thing is, maybe not the most important, but the thing I like about Pika the most is how the solopreneurs and the people in the Pika community start to help each other. So it's as one person recently said, I found my tribe, because it can be very isolating to be self-employed. Sure, you might have your spouse or your best friend or partner that you can obviously talk things over with, but if they're not self-employed, it's not quite the same thing. All right, so let's get rolling. I'm going to take you through about uh, 10, I don't forget, 10 or 12 top things to consider. Before I forget, I want to put this in the chat. If I can find it, button for the chat, there it is. There's a corresponding worksheet that goes with these 10 things to consider that you can print out and jot down your answers to if you wish. I think it's actually on the next slide. Yeah, there it is. So as you know, this is being recorded. You're on mute, but you certainly don't have to be. I prefer these workshops to be interactive, so I don't feel like I'm talking to myself because that's really boring. So please participate. But I do fly solo, so better just to interrupt me or speak up than to put things in the chat, because as you just witnessed, I had trouble finding the button. Okay, so let's get rolling. First of all, I'd like to ask each of you, what is your number one fear, uncertainty, or doubt about being self-employed? Call that fun. If you
Healthcare and income. So I guess
healthcare,
that's number one, number two.
healthcare, we'll talk about that for sure. And income happens to be the next slide, so we'll definitely cover both of those.
I think in addition to those, it's kind of sourcing business.
Sourcing business.
Yes.
Yes, that one. Yes, for sure. Because, and I will talk about this as well. Most of us are really good at what we do, whether that's internal communications or organizational development or design or executive coaching, but we're not necessarily salespeople. So yes, we'll talk about that too. Anything else? No. Okay. All right. Well, now the cat wants to get out, so the door's closed. All right, so let's get into it. Let's first talk about this two sides of the same coin here. So I just lumped them both together under money management. So slow and erratic cash flow is probably the single hardest part about being self-employed, especially if you plan to work with large companies. Although large companies are used to paying higher rates for consultants, which is definitely a good thing, their payment terms are terrible. It's counterintuitive, but the larger the company, the slower they pay. You would think that it would be the other way around. But I once reviewed a contract and their payment terms were end of accounting period 120 days. Like, we're not waiting 5 months to get paid.
Mhm.
So corporate payment terms are generally, you can negotiate them back down to 45 days. But that still means that if you work 100 hours in January and you submit an invoice in February 1, you won't see any cash until the middle of March at the earliest. So you need to be able to definitely live for 3 or 4 months with no income. And then once you have your first project, then you need to prepare for that interim period where before you line up the next one and start billing again. So that's what I'm saying. It tends to look like a richer scale. When I was self-employed, my monthly income ranged from $5,000 a month to $28,000 a month. Obviously, $28,000 a month is a good living, but you can't live as a single mom in San Francisco on $5,000 a month. So that's another reason why you need to have that safety net.
Liz, I love that you mentioned that you're a single mom. I am also a single mom and I have a mortgage, and that is terrifying to me. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes, I've been in your shoes. So, yes, but I will tell you that my favorite trick, actually, for helping to sort of smooth out this safety net, this erratic cash flow and the safety net issue, and also to handle the taxes part, getting a little ahead of myself. But my favorite trick was the very first time I got caught short for quarterly taxes because I didn't have enough money put aside. I said, okay, I'm never, this is never happening again. So I have no fiscal discipline whatsoever. If I see I have 10 grand in savings, I'll think, oh, great, we can go to Hawaii. So I actually had to open a whole separate bank account with a separate bank. So when I logged in, I didn't see it, and I had to hide money for myself. Every time a client paid an invoice, I took in the early years half of it, and then I slowly backed down to 40% of it, and I put it into the secret bank, the online bank, so I wouldn't see it. Then when it was time to pay my quarterly taxes, I transferred the necessary money over to my primary banking account, and I would pay my quarterly taxes. At the end of the year, I'd have $25,000 left over, and that went into my STEP IRA retirement account, or you can also use a solo 401k, and that's the goose that lays the golden eggs, because that's what lowers your effective tax rate. So that's how I managed to avoid getting caught short on the taxes, and it would also definitely work as my safety net too, because there were times, right? If I had income of $5,000 a month, I wasn't going to be able to pay the mortgage and keep a house over our head, roof over our head. So I would borrow money from the secret bank account. I put a big sticky note right above my computer that said, you owe secret bank $5,000. And then when it gets the next invoice, then I pay it back. So that's how I managed to sort of smooth out that Richter scale. But it can be stressful, and it is something that you need to be able to manage. So that's what I talk about, money management. That's because one of you mentioned your number one FUD was income. Yeah, it no matter what you do, it's gonna look like this. That's just the nature of being self-employed. I might have to get up and let this cat out because now he wants to go the other direction. Hold on just a moment. I'm sorry, I've never had to do this before. Well, thankfully, we're a casual group here at Pika. I had the door closed because, of course, the cleaning lady was vacuuming. All right, so let's keep rolling. Second thing to consider is dealing with uncertainty. Depending on your area of expertise and your price point, you may always have plenty of work, or you may have to go for a few months in between projects, which is back to my point about erratic cash flow. So you really have to be honest with yourself if you're the type of person who can deal with not knowing where your next project is coming from. For years, I tried to talk a consultant friend of mine into leaving her global consulting firm. She was with Accenture. And I kept trying to talk her into going independent. And I told her how she'd make more money, she'd work less, she wouldn't have to travel all the time. And she said, Liz, I know I wouldn't be able to handle the stress of not knowing how I was going to pay the mortgage every month. She says, it would literally freak me out. So I gave up trying to talk her into it. So you need to ask yourself the same thing. Like my friend Benita, maybe it's just not the right thing for you. The other part of this, though, is you have to be able to adapt on the fly. So last summer, I work from home, right? This is my home office, obviously the cat and cleaning lady. And I came down to lead this exact webinar, and the internet was out. I'm like, oh, great. So I went and rebooted the router, still no internet. Router apparently was dead. I said, well, I don't have time to go to Best Buy, buy a new router, and fiddle around with all that. So I got on my phone, I did a search, internet cafe near me. So I went to the coffee shop about a mile from my house. I sat outside and I led this workshop from the patio of the coffee shop. And it just made me think, yeah, when you're self-employed, right? There's no IT help desk. You just got to be able to adapt and go with the flow. That said, I wouldn't trade it for anything. All right. Factor number 3, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. In my experience of coaching independent consultants, I forgot to mention when I introduced myself that this is Pika is my side hustle, my hobby. I actually don't get paid for building or running Pika. I make my money through my other company, which is called the Proco Agency. And we represent independent consultants who specialize in order effectiveness with Fortune 500 companies. And so as a result of growing Proco into a multi-million-dollar company, that's why I got the reputation as the person to call if you have questions about being self-employed. So after coaching hundreds of people through Proco Agency and now hundreds more people through Pika, I've noticed a trend that the people who have prior consulting experience have an easier time transitioning into self-employment. It doesn't mean that if you're coming from 20 years in the industry that you can't do it. It just means you have to learn a few more skills. Because really consulting boils down to managing expectations, listening attentively, and managing scope. Like what's in scope for you to do, what's in your contract, and what's out of scope or not in your contract. And it takes practice to learn how to say, sure, I'd love to help you with this, but that's not what's in our current contract. Would you like to set up a separate conversation to see about how I might be able to help you with that? Because that would trigger a change order or an amendment or a new contract, right? So uh, it, it's something to consider that if you've worked internally, maybe on a task force or project teams, or like if you've worked particularly in the area of either HR or development or something like that, we've had a certain client group, that is, those skills tend to be a bit more transferable to being self-employed. So again, these are all things to consider. Okay, number 4. This is actually bigger than it looks. Your mental outlook is so important. A lot of people come to this workshop because they've been laid off, particularly in the recent months. And so that could be the best time to strike out on your own because you probably have severance, or it could be the worst time because you maybe feel a little defeated. I'm always reminded of my brother who was, I don't know, in his mid to late 50s when he got laid off. And uh, he was telling me about his job search. He wasn't thinking about going independent, but he said, well, sis, he says, I'm kind of down about it because who's going to hire, a middle-aged white man with gray hair? And I said, well, nobody, if you go into it with that attitude. So this is the same thing, right? When you strike out on your own, you have to have an enormous amount of confidence that the skills and expertise that you're bringing to market, that you're really good at it, you love helping people with whatever the situation is, and that you can make a go of it. If you don't have the confidence at the very beginning about how to set up and run your own business, obviously that's why we founded Pika. But you need to have the confidence that you're smart enough to figure it out, whatever it is, right? Because that's one of the things I love about being self-employed is every day is a different thing to learn. So I have the confidence that I'm smart enough to figure it out, or I know I can find the right person who can help me. So that's a big part of being self-employed. All right, so this is the other super big one that you all said yes, yes, yes when I asked you what your biggest fear, uncertainty, and doubt was. And indeed, it's a big one. The one thing I also want to say about fear, uncertainty, and doubt is it never goes away completely. So I've been self-employed now 19 years. Still to this day, every December I freak out because contracts tend to end on December 31. It happened again just last December. I was talking to my CFO and I said, all the, our cash flow is going to fall off a cliff. We have all these projects ending on December 31. She says, Liz, you're doing it again. You do it every December. I said, I know. So my point is that the fear and certainty doubt never really goes away. It's just bigger on your shoulder when you're just starting out because you have to learn so much, like how to set up your business and how to figure out your marketing, how to build your website, and how to figure out your pricing. All the things are things that Pika can help you with. And business development is another one of those things. We run a whole separate workshop on business development. One way to get over this hurdle about business development is to never call it sales. Don't even think of it as sales. So I've been self-employed for 19 years. And to this day, I swear I've never done any sales or business development. In my mind, I call it outreach. And it's all about just keeping my network warm, reaching out to people, being thoughtful, being top of mind, creating awareness, being perceived as an expert. None of that involves selling because nobody likes to be sold. In fact, I just published an article, I think a couple days ago, called Think APV, not ABC. So if you've ever seen that movie Glengarry Glen Ross, where Alec Baldwin is like hammering into these salespeople, always be closing. That's the kiss of death when you're self-employed. Instead, you should be thinking APV, always provide value.
Liz, your article actually came across my LinkedIn feed yesterday.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that's funny. I just want to tell you.
And
apologies if I'm talking too much. I'm the only us who's talking very much, but I know you wanted some interaction.
I do like the interaction. And it was the shortest article I've ever written. Maybe this is too short, but anyway, glad you saw it. But it's one of my guiding principles, APV. Like I had an introductory call with a gentleman yesterday, just simply a networking call. Neither one of us really had an agenda. And as a follow-up, I put a postscript and said, P.S. attached is the Wall Street Journal article I mentioned. Because that was my way of adding more value other than just the conversation. So anyway, my point is, as solopreneurs, we tend to be experts in our field or consultants, and we're problem solvers, and we're not salespeople. The good news is you don't have to be a salesperson. And as I said, Pika has resources in a workshop that specifically targets how to build your business when you're self-employed without selling. That said, I'm trying to talk you out of being self-employed today. So these are the things that you really need to think about. If you're comfortable reaching out to nearly everybody you know and either asking a question or informing them that you're going to be self-employed, you're going to have a much easier time getting business. If you're painfully shy or just feel like, yeah, I don't know, I haven't talked to that person in 4 years. They're going to think it's weird. I'm reaching out to them. That kind of second guessing is not going to serve you. You need to be able to say, you know what? So what if I haven't talked to them in 4 years? COVID time was weird. In some ways, it seems like last year. So I'm going to go ahead and reach out and say hi. But that goes kind of back to the mental outlook and the confidence. You need to be the type of person that says, you know what? I'm proud of what I do. I know I'm good at what I do. And there's people out there that can really benefit from what I do. They just need to know that I'm here available to do it. So that's why I call it outreach. So you don't need to be paralyzed by the fact of doing business development, but you just need to think about, am I the type of person that it's easy for me to reach out to people. You'll have a better time getting business if you are. Okay, my cheesy comment here on supply and demand is don't roll the dice, but do a little research before you make the leap. Try to get a feel for what the market's like for your skills, services, and expertise. So let me give you two different examples here. Let's say that you're really good at planning and facilitating leadership offsites, like strategic planning or things like that. most companies can't afford to hire somebody internally on staff all the time to just run offsites. So there tends to be a lot of demand for external people to do this for them. On the other hand, let's look at executive coaching. In any given metro area, there's literally thousands of coaches. So how will you stand out from the crowd? There's a glut of supply. So you need to be able to stand out. So how do you gauge it though? Here's a couple different quick ways. Obviously, you can find anything on a good internet search. So you could pretend to be a potential client, and what search terms would you use? And be sure to put in your geographic area. Like for example, let's say internal communications Dallas-Fort Worth area, internal communications consultant Dallas-Fort Worth area, and see what what sort of results come back. I also encourage you to talk to people who either do what you do or are in a position to hire people like you. And before you make the leap to independent consulting, you're at a very unique point in time where you can safely do this. And you actually kind of goes to my next point, which is also called, you can also reach out via email with the trial balloon email. But whether you do it via email or in person, you can say, hey, Joe, I really value your opinion. If you've got, 15 minutes for a conversation or 30 minutes for a virtual cup of tea, I'd really like your input on something. Now, I kind of call this the flattery approach because people are subconsciously flattered when you ask them for their help or for their opinion. And you're not committing to anything. You're just saying, hey, coming out of the pandemic and everybody seems to be reevaluating their life and their career, and I'm one of them, and I'm thinking of stepping out on my own to do X, Y, Z. What do you think of that idea? And just pick their brain. Like, back when I was in school, we called it an informational interview. So you're not committing to going independent, but you're just asking for their opinion. This has the added benefit of kind of reeling them into your corner or to be a supporter for 3 months later when you say, hey, you know what? I went for it. I'm launching my new website. Then they're more likely to cheer you on and refer you to others because you involve them in the decision. So that's my favorite thing to tell people to do when they're thinking about, even if you've made up your mind that you're definitely going to do it, still pretend like you're on the fence about it and reach out to at least 5 people and say, hey, thinking about doing this. What do you think? And of course, the other key point is to listen to what they say. Because they might say, well, I've never heard of anybody hiring somebody that does underwater basket weaving. Why on earth would you try to do that on your own? So don't, yeah, it's just go ask people and you'll be surprised at what they say. When I was, so I fell into independent in 2004, independent consulting in 2004. After about 5 years, 6 years, I forget, I lose track of time. Anyway, it must have been more like 7 or 8 years. Yeah, let's go with 7. It felt like Groundhog Day because I was doing the same type of consulting projects over and over and over again. I'm like, I'm not building anything. I'm not getting anywhere. I'm doing the same thing over and over again. I'm like one of those hamsters on the treadmill. I want to do something different. I want to build a company. So I was actually right at the same time. I had been recruited to join a small boutique firm. And I thought, oh, this is great. They wanted to build their org change practice, which is exactly the work I've been doing for 14, 15 years at that point. And so I joined the small boutique firm. Well, within about 6 weeks, I realized that, oh no, this was not the right path for me. But that's a different story. The reason I'm telling this story is I reached out to my former clients and I said, hey, join this little company, Lewis Allen Worldwide. I still do the same work, whatever. So, feel free to reach out to me. None of them ever did. And so I actually followed up with one of my very best clients, Sally, at a Fortune 500 tech company in Silicon Valley. And I said, Sally, what's going on? I used to get so much business from you and from this company. She said, yeah, now that you're with a small firm, that makes us uncomfortable because whenever we bring somebody in from a firm, they're always trying to cross sell us and upsell us. And next thing you know, they want to bring in tech consultants. I thought, So interesting. Anyway, I ended up leaving that firm and did a lot more work for that company again. But that wasn't why I left the firm. My point is that uh, sometimes companies prefer to hire individuals instead of small firms. So it, it, it's an angle that might work in your favor. Again, it depends on the type of work you do. All right, so this this slide or item number 7 used to be something else until it was last year, the year before. I had somebody in my solopreneur boot camp that is 11 sessions over 8 weeks, and I realized, not everybody is really cut out to be self-employed. So in particular, I'm thinking of this gentleman who was super smart and very well accomplished. He'd been in the tech industry for, I don't know, 20, 25 years. He specialized in data center acceleration. Okay, I can't even say it, let alone understand it. But I'm always telling people when you're self-employed, you need to have a niche. You need to be really good at something so that people know that you're the expert. Well, he was clearly the expert at data center acceleration. But his problem was he had shiny object syndrome. In the boot camp, we give very structured homework. And it'd say, okay, well, did you guys update your LinkedIn profiles? Did you redo your LinkedIn profiles? He'd say, oh no, I didn't. I got really busy fiddling around with building the website. I'm like, yeah, well, not on that part yet. So you're kind of putting things out of sequence. And he was never able to complete his homework. He was just the kind of guy that um, like I said, shiny object syndrome. Like he'd go down rabbit holes of things that were interesting to him. He wasn't able to even follow the curriculum of the boot camp. 9 months later, he was hired back as a vice president of data center, whatever, with a big company. He would have saved himself a lot of angst and frustration if he just realized, I'm kind of the type of person that really likes and needs the structure and the rhythm of being with a large company. He liked doing the quarterly business reviews. He liked meeting with his team once a week. He liked doing the check-ins with his boss once a month. That's just, if he'd been doing that his whole career, it was just his nature. He sort of needed that structure. So another thing for you to think about before you become self-employed. Like a lot of people say, oh, well, I definitely want to be self-employed because then I have all the flexibility. I can work whenever I want. I'm like, yeah, you can work any 7 days you want. Right? It
Oh,
just depends, right? So, like I'll take Friday afternoon off, but I'll work 4 hours on Saturday instead because I want to go skiing when it's not crowded. So that is the joy of being self-employed, but you do still need to have the discipline to get through your to-do list, to sit down and make stuff happen. All right. So one of you did mention this as your top bud was benefits, and it's easier than it used to be, but it's still exorbitantly expensive, right? So the health exchanges made it possible to buy health insurance on your own, but it's still super expensive. I moved from San Francisco to Nevada a few years ago, and I now here in Nevada. My daughter is in college, so she's on her college insurance plan. So it's just me. And I'm paying, just went up, I want to say $756 a month with a $6,000 deductible. So I'm self-insuring for a lot of that, but I don't have any health issues or anything like that. So for the last, I don't know, ever since 2004 when I fell into independent consulting, or actually 2005 when my COBRA ran out, I've been buying my own insurance. So there's two sides to this. One is if you can, the main thing is your billing rate. You have to charge enough to be able to pay $1,000 a month in your own insurance. It's just the math has to work. The single biggest mistake I see people make when they step in independent consulting is they don't charge enough. They take their salary divided by 2,000 working hours in a year, and they're like, oh, okay, I'll charge $125 an hour. Yeah, no, that's you're grossly underpaid by doing that math. I've run a billing rates and pricing strategy workshop to help people avoid that mistake. So number one thing is you have to price high enough that you can afford it. The other thing trick though is to a couple other tips. One is to use a health insurance broker. The health brokers don't get paid by you; they get paid by the insurance company. So when I moved to Nevada, I literally just did a internet search like health insurance broker Nevada, and I reached out to this woman in Las Vegas. I'm in Reno, and I said, I just moved. I Blue Shield, Blue Cross, whatever isn't going to cover me here in Nevada. I need new insurance, but I definitely want a health savings account compatible plan, an HSA compatible plan. Because an HSA, health savings account, is different than a flexible spending account. A health savings account allows you to save um, anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000 a year, depending if you're single or family. And it just grows over time. You can invest it and grow it over time to save for retirement, and it lowers your taxes. So anyway, long story short, she was able to find me a, a good plan that was HSA compatible. Then the following year, I just renewed whatever. They sent me some packet of information, but who has time to read the 12 pages that the insurance company sends to you? So I didn't read it and I just renewed. Well, she sent me an email and then she called me because I didn't reply to her email. She said, "Did you renew that plan?" I said, "Well, yeah, I took time to read all that." She says, "They've discontinued the HSA compatible plan. They converted it to a regular insurance plan. So you won't be able to save for the retirement in HSA. And I thought that was important to you." And I said, "It's very important to me." She says, "Okay, let's get you a new plan." So I never would have known that if it wasn't for the health insurance agent or broker. So that's awesome. I would never buy insurance for that one, to be honest. Although they are
So
getting
Liz,
harder and harder to find. Yeah.
I currently have an HSA, but when I leave my employer, what happens? I'm sorry, this is probably a little more detailed than you wanted to get into, but do I have to find a new HSA or how does that work?
Well, you need to make sure that it's a health savings account, not a
It is.
flexible spending account. Okay, so health
Yes.
savings account should be static, should stick with you wherever you go.
Okay.
Or
All right.
or I'm sure you can transfer it to another plan. Sort of like when I left one company, went to another company, and I had my money with their 401k. I was able to roll it over to
Right.
their 401k. I'm 100% sure that you can do that with an HSA because the government wants that money to stay in that plan. They don't want you to withdraw it and pay penalties.
Oh, I don't want to withdraw it because I'll pay a ton. Okay. Thank you.
So now I'm neither a lawyer nor a financial planner, so I don't give
Understood. Taking it as personal advice.
yes,
Thank
but
you.
it makes sense. It makes sense that it would be transferable. My
So
plan was
can I,
set up.
oh, sorry, this is Stephanie. Can I jump in here? I had experience with this and there was a fee associated with transferring from my old HSA into my new HSA. So it's something to ask about whether there are any fees associated. I didn't ask that question ahead of time. So I ended up with two HSA accounts running at the same time because I was frugal and didn't want to pay the fees and spent the money from the less valued, I guess, or the one that had the less amount of money and spent the money in that while I was contributing to the other one. So it's just something to think about.
Excellent
Thank you.
point. I just put in the chat, check out HSA Bank. That's where mine has been forever. And they have a lot of helpful articles on their website. I think it's hsabank.com.
Thank you.
So anyway, yes. So I'll save you a lot of time though, that if you can insure yourself by going on Cobra, go on Cobra. Like don't even bother dinking around with health exchanges because I guarantee it's going to be less expensive to go on Cobra. The reason is because Cobra is you're buying into a group health insurance plan. And group health insurance plans are always less expensive, right? Because they're spreading the risk across 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 people, depending on the size of the company. So even though you'll have to pay probably the whole premium, because the employer used to pay a share and now you're going to have to pay 100%, it's still going to be cheaper than buying your own plan on a health exchange. The other thing, though, that people don't tell you about being self-employed is that your vacations are going to be twice as expensive, which is bad news for somebody like me. I really only work to take nice vacations. Well, okay, keep a roof over my daughter's head. But the reason they're twice as expensive is because you have to spend the $5,000 to go to Hawaii for a week, but that's also a week you're not working.
Mhm.
So unless you have some sort of passive income, like rental property, whatever, that's what I mean by the prices expensive. For me personally, I don't care. I always used to max out my vacation time when I was an employee. And so, like I said, this is one of the reasons why I work so hard, actually, is so that we can take a really great international trip every other year. But it's definitely something to think about. Did I answer questions about benefits? Because one of you in particular had mentioned that this was one of your fear, uncertainty, or doubt.
Yeah, that was me, and I appreciate all the information.
All right, so I think just two more things to consider, and then I'm going to tell you how to get started or test the waters. All right, so the other thing to think about is work ethic. This is my favorite Dilbert cartoon of all time because it reminds me back from the days when I worked at PwC Consulting. So as I said earlier, yeah, you have the flexibility of working any 60 hours a week you want, whether you work on a Friday or you work it on a Saturday. But if you tend to be more of a structured person who likes to work 9 to 5, this is not the career choice for you. Because even though no, I don't care what type of business you do, it's never 9 to 5 as when you're self-employed. It's just not. Like your internet router goes out, or client has an emergency, or whatever the case is, or my favorite, my daughter broke her arm. I got to take her to emergency, but I told the client I'd have something to her by the end of the day. So I get back from emergency at 10 o'clock at night. I'm like, okay, great. Now I got to spend the next 4 hours doing what I thought I was going to be doing instead of going to the emergency room. That's just the way it is. So the other trick to that is to be very careful about what you promise to do. Because when you're self-employed, your reputation is everything, and you can't flake out. You can't disappoint a client. So if you tell a client you're going to have it to them by end of day, you got to stay up and get it done by end of day, and not come up with some excuse like, oh, I have to take my child to the emergency room, which clearly is a legitimate excuse, but it's much better to just keep your word. So people who tend to be very successful when they're self-employed do whatever it takes to keep their word. All right, a little known one, and back to the more fluffy, squishy side of things. I have seen people bounce back to full-time jobs because they just missed two things, or both things. They missed mentoring others, or having a team and coaching them, and just sort of being a part of that rhythm and environment, and or they missed seeing the results of their work play out over time. So when I was an independent consultant, I'm hired to do a job. I get in there, work on it for anywhere from 6 to 9, 15 months. And then I was like, okay, great. You're stable. You got the sustainment stuff done. You got your metrics that you're going to track, and call me if you need. I'm wired that way. I just like to solve problems, get through it, and move on to the next thing. I don't like doing the same things over and over and over again, except maybe leading this workshop because there's always something different. But in a normal job, I was bored out of my mind. So my first job out of grad school, I was an internal org development consultant for a Fortune 500 company. Probably one of the best jobs I've ever had for sure. But by year 2, year 3, and I started having to do things like from the 360-degree program for the third time. Yeah, I can't keep doing this. I need more challenge. I need to go solve some problems. But, some people prefer to just see things play out and work with a team and things like that. So they're fluffy things to consider for sure, but it does boil down to job fulfillment. Okay. Any questions before we transition into how to test the waters? See if maybe you like it, if I haven't talked you out of it. Okay, no questions yet. By the way, I'm more than happy to stay after the workshop and answer any questions about anything once we're not being recorded. All right, so let's see. You can test the waters without being fully committed. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you're going to be self-employed, you need to get a business license and maybe set up an LLC and, work on some branding and name your business and all of these other complicated things that PK can help you with. But if you're not sure, there is a way that you can sort of try consulting to see if you like it. Now, if you're a financial planner or something like that, I don't know if these options apply, but let's just stick with the consulting thing for now. So the first thing I would advise you to do is to consider subcontracting through an agency or an online platform. Normally, this is not what Pika is about. Pika is about teaching people to be independent, to find their own work and pay less tax and not give up 35% or more of their salary or their invoices to another company, to the agency or the online firm. But when you're just starting out, you can subcontract through these agencies. They do everything. They find the work, they do the contracting, they set the billing rate, they handle the insurance, they invoice the client. Literally, you just need to do the work. So it's a great way to see if you even like the rhythm or the flow of consulting, because you don't need to do anything except win the one. Like I just said, though, you're only going to get paid about 65% of what you're worth. So that's why it's not a long-term solution, right? Because it's a bad idea to give up that much of your income. But that's a different workshop. So these are some national agencies to consider. I will be sending these slides out to you, and all of these are hyperlinked to their websites. They all have a different flavor. They specialize in different things, etc. So you kind of just need to read through their websites and see, if they're going to be a good fit for the line of work that you like to do. Patina Solutions, you have to have at least 25 years of experience. They really specialize in interim staffing, right? Where a company needs an interim CFO, interim head of HR, whatever. So they really specialize in those kind of interim roles. I hear very good things about BTG, Business Talent Group, although I've never billed through any of these agencies. I always found my own work because I wasn't willing to give up that 35%. So a little story about that. When I fell into independent consulting in 2004, and then finished that project up about 9 months later. So I was heading into 2005, and I thought, oh shoot, I don't have anything lined up. I have a mortgage and a kid. I gotta make something happen. So I went and I interviewed with a bunch of regional firms in the San Francisco Bay Area that did work, organizational change work, which is what I specialized in. And I actually interviewed at M Squared Consulting. And I asked the woman, I'm like, so how does the billing and your markup work? And she says, oh well, we we'll pay you X, and then we'll build a company Y. I'm like, okay, well that's reasonable. And then I went home, and because I can't do any math in my head at all, I whipped out my trusty business school calculator. I'm like, holy smokes, that's 35% up. That's a 35% markup. I'm like, where would that work out for what does that equal for one of my typical projects? So I did change management consulting on big, hairy tech projects, like implementing SAP or Oracle worldwide, like big, massive projects. They were always at least 9 months, always at least 40 hours a week. Sometimes they'd peak to 60. So I ran the numbers. I'm like, okay, let's say it's 40 hours a week for 9 months. And I said, holy smokes, they're going to make $45,000 simply by introducing me to the client. I'm not willing to give up $45,000. I'm going to find my own work. So I called the lady back the next day or sent an email, whatever. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. I decided I'm going to find my own work. And I always did, because I wasn't willing to give up $45,000. Now, if you tend to do work that's shorter in duration, let's say 2-3 weeks at a time, or even a month at a time, or 6 weeks, yeah, the numbers aren't going to play out to be as huge, right? You're not going to be giving up $45,000, but you have to run the numbers. The same thing is true when you're self-employed and you're lining up work, and they say, when you say, my rate's $200 an hour, I'm like, oh, that's going to be a little bit more than what we were hoping to pay. Can you come down to $185? Okay, well, it seems like $15 an hour. That's not a big deal, but you have to run the numbers, right? If it's a 500-hour contract, you're giving up a lot of money, which is worth more to you than it is to them. So anyway, I've covered some of those things in the billing rates and pricing strategies workshop. The point is, when you build through these firms, they do all the work, and it's a good way to test the waters to see if you even like consulting, and or to build out your network, right? So if you, let's say there's a Pika member who was at Hewlett Packard for 22 years. She says, Liz, everybody I know either still works at Hewlett Packard or is retired. I said, well, you might want to consider, subcontracting for some of these other firms, because that would be a way to expand your network. The online platforms here on this slide do the same thing. They match, consulting talent with projects, but they do it via keyword search and artificial intelligence. There aren't as many humans involved, so their markup tends to be less. It tends to be only like 20%, maybe 25%, depending on the platform, which sounds like a great deal. The downside is there's 80,000 people in the database, right? At least Catalans I know has at least 80,000 people, probably over 100,000 people at this point. So you really need to be able to stuff your resume full of keywords. Use a long version of your resume if you're going to try an online platform. So what do I mean by that? When I worked at PwC, my resume was about 3 or 4 pages long, because every client project I had ever done was listed as a separate item, separate paragraph. So if I uploaded that to one of these online platforms, you would have seen the word change management, I don't know, 4 dozen times, because everything I did was change management, change management, change management, change management. But that's what you want to do to trigger the algorithm. So even if you've worked internally, like the Pika member Sharon, who was at Hewlett Packard, I said, create a long version of your resume where every program you ever managed at Hewlett Packard, you listed as a separate little paragraph with bullet points. And that's how you play the numbers game with the online platforms. All these logos are hyperlinks. So when you get the slides, you can click through to their website. So anyway, that's a good way to test the water. But what if I really haven't talked you out of it and you're sure you want to do this? In fact, there's somebody who signed up for this webinar who is already a Pika member. So I'm pretty sure he's made up his mind that he's going to make the leap. So how do you really get started? Obviously, that's why we created Pika, and that's what Pika does really, really well. So the first thing I would recommend is that you download that worksheet that I put in the chat that you see here, pikanetwork.org/worksheet, and discuss these things with your partner, whether it's your adult child, your best friend, your husband, whatever, because you're going to need the support of somebody close to you, because, like I said, it's hard. The other thing I would say next is, this is literally what I would do if I was in your shoes. I would take the $69 workshop, How to Get Started as an Independent Consultant, which is coming up on March 15th, because it's $69. I think it's an hour. I think that one is an hour. But you literally walk out with a checklist of these are all the things you need to do to set up your business. And I will tell you that setting up an LLC is not even one of the top 3. So I would take that workshop. Then if you want to join Pika, I would use the code we give you at that workshop to get credit for the $69, and then you can join Pika for $395 minus $69. I call it the try before you buy, or the wine tasting program, right? If you go wine tasting, you buy the bottle, then you have to pay for the wine tasting. This is sort of the same thing. So yes, Pika is $395 for the first year. It includes all of our workshops, office hours, coaching, tools, templates, etc., the whole shebang. And then renewals are $199 the following 12 months after that. So that's what Pika is all about. And so with that, I will end the recording. You will get these notes by end of day tomorrow. My assistant's out, so I'm just making sure I'm not over promising. Because I'm gonna have
Following your own advice.
Exactly. I'm gonna have to do it. I'm like, can I do this by end of day tomorrow? Yes, I can. So you'll get these notes via email. And yeah, that's it. So I'm going to stop the recording, and like I said, I'm happy to hang out and answer more questions. No, I don't want to create a breakout room. I want to stop the recording.